Okay, friends, this one's a bitter pill. Donald Trump's sentencing in his New York case on his 34 felony convictions has been postponed from September 18th until November 26th. That's right, after the upcoming presidential election. So, is there any silver lining lurking behind this particular big, dark, orange cloud? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, this postponement of Donald Trump's sentencing date in New York was probably inevitable. We've talked about why that is before, and we'll talk about it again today. It was probably inevitable, but this is not the way the postponement had to play out. This is not the form the postponement had to take. We'll talk about why that is in a minute, but let's start with the new reporting. This from the New York Times. Headline, Judge delays Trump's sentencing until after Election Day. And that article begins, the judge overseeing Donald Trump's criminal case in Manhattan postponed his sentencing until after Election Day, a significant victory for the former president as he seeks to overturn his conviction and win back the White House. In a ruling on Friday, the judge, Juan, rescheduled the sentencing for November 26, citing the unique time frame this matter currently finds itself in. He had previously planned to hand down Mr. Trump's punishment on September 18, just 7 weeks before Election Day, when Mr. Trump will face off against Vice President Kamala Harris for the presidency. Quote, this is not a decision this court makes lightly, but it is the decision which, in this court's view, best advances the interests of justice, Justice Merchan wrote in the 4-page ruling, which noted that this matter is one that stands alone in a unique place in this nation's history. The judge appeared eager to skirt a swirl of partisan second-guessing in the campaign's final stretch, asserting that the court is a fair, impartial, and apolitical institution. He said that the integrity of our judicial system demands that the sentencing be free from distraction or distortion. But while his decision will avert a courtroom spectacle before the election, the delay itself could still affect its results, keeping the voters in the dark about whether the Republican presidential nominee will eventually spend time behind bars. So friends, you can probably hear the disappointment in my voice. But let's give Judge Merchan his due. Let's look at just a few paragraphs of his short 3.5-page order. Here's how it starts. By letter dated August 14, 2024, defendant Trump requests an adjournment of his sentencing, currently scheduled for September 18, 2024, until after the 2024 presidential election. He argues the adjournment is necessary to provide adequate time to assess and pursue appellate options in the event this court denies his pending criminal procedural law motion. So friends, let me pause there for just a minute. Remember when I said that a continuance, a postponement of Trump's sentencing was probably inevitable? That's what Judge Merchan was getting at right there. Here's the posture that Donald Trump's criminal case in New York is in at this moment. After the jury convicted him on those 34 felony counts, falsifying business records to cheat and try to steal the 2016 presidential election, the Supreme Court handed down that horrific presidential immunity ruling. And right now, Judge Merchan is in the process of deciding the impact that the Supreme Court ruling has on Donald Trump's felony convictions, whether they're just fine, they're sound, because nothing he did in the case was official presidential conduct, so the Supreme Court ruling doesn't really impact the case, or he has to decide maybe the new Supreme Court ruling means I have to throw out all of the convictions. Judge Merchan said he's going to hand down that ruling on September 16th. That's what he said originally. And Donald Trump's lawyers said, okay, then on September 16th, if you rule that you're not throwing out my case, and that is, I predict, precisely how Judge Merchan will rule, we're going to appeal it. We're going to request a stay of the sentencing date, and the sentencing date will have to be postponed, continued into the future. And we have talked several times over, friends, about how that's probably exactly what would happen. That's why I say the postponement of the September 18th sentencing date was probably inevitable because of the procedural posture of the case. But I also said it didn't have to be this way. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But for now, let's go back and look at some more of Judge Merchan's ruling. So he says that the defendant requested the adjournment, first because of that appellate concern that we just discussed, and to avoid the potential politically prejudicial impact that a public sentencing could have on him and his prospects in the upcoming election, to which I say, oh, bullshit. That is not a reason to continue this sentencing. You did the crimes, you were convicted by a jury of your peers, and now you're concerned that if you're sentenced, it's going to impact your election prospects? Are you effing kidding me, sport? That would be my editorial addition. None of that was in Judge Merchan's ruling. Let's go back to the ruling. He, Trump, attempts to bolster his application for this postponement by repeating a litany of perceived and unsubstantiated grievances from previous filings that do not merit this court's attention and will not be addressed in this decision. The people, meaning the prosecutors, by letter dated August 16, 2024, state that they, the prosecutors, defer to the court on the appropriate post-trial schedule that allows adequate time to adjudicate defendant's motion, meaning the appeal that inevitably will come. Nonetheless, the people, to assist the court with its determination, identify several reasons why an adjournment, meaning a postponement, would be appropriate. So friends, right there, that is essentially the prosecutors conceding that, Judge, it seems to be a foregone conclusion that when you deny the motion to dismiss because you're not going to throw out the case based on presidential immunity, everything would come to a screeching halt anyway because he would take an immediate appeal, and because it's an immunity issue, he's entitled to take an immediate appeal. So the prosecutors tacitly, the subtext there, conceded sentencing ain't going to happen on the 18th, and we all kind of know it. That's an important backdrop against which to judge what Judge Merchan decided to do here. I think he was doing his best, and as we used to say when I was a career prosecutor and judges made rulings against us that we kind of understood, we would say, yeah, I'm not mad at him. Well, I think Judge Merchan did the best he could, and I'm not mad at him. His ruling continues. As a threshold matter, this court finds that despite the prosecutor's stated neutrality on the question of the postponement, they present concerns in the letter of August 16, 2024, in a matter which seemingly supports defendant's application for an adjournment, and the people, the prosecutors, certainly do not oppose, and a careful reading of their response can fairly be construed as adjoinder of the motion. Just kind of puts the exclamation point on, look, we all know what's going on here. We know it's going to be continued because of the procedural posture and the likely appeal and the impact of the likely appeal. So we're going to go ahead and postpone. Let's finish up Judge Merchan's ruling with this. Unfortunately, we are now at a place in time that is fraught with complexities, rendering the requirements of a sentencing hearing, should one be necessary, difficult to execute. Thus, in accordance with certain of the grounds submitted by defendant and the reasons for adjournment provided by the people, coupled with the unique time frame this matter currently finds itself in, the decision on the motion and the imposition of sentence will be adjourned to avoid any appearance, however unwarranted, that the proceeding has been affected by or seeks to affect the approaching presidential election in which the defendant is a candidate. The court is a fair, impartial, and apolitical institution. Adjourning decision, meaning postponing a decision, on the motion and sentencing, if such is required, should dispel any suggestion that the court will have issued any decision or imposed sentence either to give an advantage to or to create a disadvantage for any political party and or any candidate for office. This is not a decision this court makes lightly, but it is the decision which, in the court's view, best advances the interests of justice. Okay, friends, let's wrap up with a few takeaways. First of all, Judge Merchan was going to issue his immunity ruling on September 16th, and then the sentencing date had been set for September 18th, but as we discussed, it was going to be postponed one way or another. Now, Judge Merchan put at the end of this order that he will decide the immunity issue on November 12th. And, as you just heard, he set the sentencing date for November 26th. But let's be clear. Donald Trump is not going to be sentenced on November 26th either. Why? Because the case will be in the same posture. When Judge Merchan rules, very likely, that he's not throwing Donald Trump's convictions out because of the Supreme Court presidential immunity case, Donald Trump will inevitably file the appeal and everything will come to a screeching halt. So I think it's extremely unlikely Donald Trump will be sentenced on November 26th. So let's keep that in the back of our minds and not get our hopes up. Of course, that will be after he loses the election. I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. Two, I think one of the things that might have been in the back of Judge Merchan's mind when he was trying to figure out how to best move forward in the case is this. Judge Tanya Chutkan, federal court judge, is wrestling with, is litigating as we speak, the question of the impact of the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling on Donald Trump's criminal prosecution in Washington, D.C., his federal case for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And it seems to me Judge Merchan could very well have said to himself, you know, I don't know that it makes the most sense for me, a state court judge, to go about trying to litigate the question of what this Supreme Court ruling means when Judge Chutkan is in the process of figuring that out, litigating, and she will rule on that in the coming months. Not that Judge Merchan is not up to the task, but it wouldn't surprise me if he would want to see how the federal courts, federal judges interpret the Supreme Court case, which is now precedent, absolute presidential immunity, how they handle it, how they decide issues before he has to decide those same issues. So this may have also been a practical ruling from his perspective because we're about to get some guidance, some clarity from federal court judges on what this Supreme Court ruling means. And then third, when Donald Trump is sentenced, and unless the Supreme Court throws him yet another lifeline and somehow does away with his New York criminal conviction, a state court conviction, he will be sentenced. And you know what? He will be sentenced at a time when he's not a candidate for the presidency of the United States, when he's not president-elect, because he will have been crushed in the upcoming November election. So he won't be president-elect, he won't be a candidate, he certainly won't be president. He'll just be a plain old citizen, a treasonous one at that. But I actually think, friends, that that may increase the odds that Judge Merchan will sentence him to prison. I mean, judges are human, and you can't help but think about, when you're imposing a sentence on a defendant who's been convicted by a jury of his peers, you can't help think about the fact that this person is the Republican nominee for president, is a candidate for the presidency. Goodness knows if he won the election in November, which he won't, then you would be sentencing the future president, not just the former president of the United States. Judges are human. That can't help but impact their thinking about what in the world is the appropriate sentence for the offenses of conviction for somebody who is headed back to the White House. Donald Trump won't be headed back to the White House by the time he is ultimately and finally sentenced for these New York state court convictions. And I believe that has a chance of increasing the likelihood that Judge Merchan will sentence him to an appropriate prison term for the crimes he committed in violation of New York state law to try to cheat in and steal the 2016 presidential election. Because justice matters. All right, friends, not our best day, not the best day for accountability or justice, but do not despair. You feel frustrated? Turn that frustration into determination to get out to the polls in numbers too big to rig and too real to steal, and help get your friends to the polls, your family to the polls, your neighbors to the polls, your acquaintances, because we are all in this together, and that's how we're going to win it. Together. Friends, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.